if you confuse your child with their body or with their intelligence or with their schoolwork or their achievements, you actually stop seeing your child. Because if you do confuse your child with what they do or what they say or what they achieve, it means you confuse yourself as well. That's very important to see that. We don't do it deliberately. None of us do it deliberately. None of us want to confuse our child with anything they achieve or do or how they look, right? But if we see ourselves through what we achieve or how we look or what we do, then unconsciously we transmit that to children. And the idea, you will continue to do that unless you come into consciousness. And I suppose it's, fear dominates our lives, doesn't it? It's like I was saying, I'm going to talk for about an hour and a half or so, and maybe at the end of the hour and a half, I'll just pick randomly 2 people to summarize what I've said for the hour and a half. Do you feel the excitement now? Do you think, oh my God, I just can't wait for him to finish, right? And isn't that sad? Because if you watch toddlers have no difficulty with public speaking. And so what has happened to us? What happened?
Conditioning.
Yeah, what happened to us is that somehow when we did make the attempt to publicly speak, we got criticized or we got compared or put down or ignored. Something happened, right? And we very wisely then stopped trying. 90% of people dread public speaking. What an indictment of our educational system that so many of us as adults find it an anxiety issue to actually say, well, what I think about that, or what I got from your talk, Tony, or I really had some difficulty with what you said there. How it comes out so easily, doesn't it? And so when we all have fears, right? And fears of public speaking and fears of what's the most common fear of all, by the way? Failure is very common. It's fear of failure. Fear of death? But when you get older, I think, you start fearing death a bit more. When you're younger, you think you're going to live forever, right? I think fear of being rejected, fear of not being accepted, fear of not being good enough. Isn't it an awful pity about fear of failure? Because failure is one of our most creative experiences, right? Because when I fail, what an opportunity to learn more. And how is it we don't embrace failure as that opportunity? Because that's what it is. I mean, when you start anything, it is important that we slip, we fall, we trip, we make the mistake, but think, oh my God, what have I to learn from it? Because you see, many of us learned failure was something that you were punished around or criticized around or labeled around. You're stupid, you're slow. How sad. And now, when you dread failure, how will you be as a parent? Will you actually now be inspired by a child's trip and a fall and by the child making the mistake and getting his words mixed up? Or will you be critical? And more likely you will be critical. And so when we leave our mobile phones on, right, it is a great opportunity to learn that the next time, well, I'll think about it, right? So, but you see, what happens to a lot of people, they get embarrassed now if they leave their mobile phones on, rather than seeing it as an opportunity to learn something. So fear dominates our lives, right? One of the things, around the teenage years, right? Adolescence is about becoming adult, right? Now, adulthood has absolutely nothing to do with age. You do understand that, don't you? Age is no index of adulthood, right? For gender is no index of adulthood either. Education is no index of adulthood. Achievements are no index of adulthood. Having children is no index of adulthood. What is an index of adulthood? Maturity. And what is maturity?
Wisdom.
And maturity is wisdom. But wisdom is always present. We never lack wisdom. But the issue is, when we're under threat, we use our wisdom to hide ourselves away. like avoiding the front seats or making sure you don't make eye contact with me for the rest of the talk in case I ask you to summarize the talk. So you avoid very cleverly. That's wisdom. And that's why I call the book Understanding Teenagers, sometimes wild, always wise. Because when teenagers are being difficult or avoiding, I don't want to go to school, I don't want to study, there's a wisdom to it. Because somehow they're protecting themselves from some threat out there. And you see, it's very hard for them to name the threat, because if they name the threat, they may even get more punished or rejected or criticized. So they have to devise a way of trying to reduce the threat and at the same time try to communicate what the threat is. And that's wisdom. But you see, if wisdom goes and creativity goes into creating defenses or walls that we hide behind, then how can we progress within a family or within a society or within a country? How can we progress if we're hiding behind walls? And you look, if you look what happened with the whole recession thing, which is the longest recession we ever had, right? And the walls of greed and the walls of avarice and the walls of bullying and intimidation and the walls of arrogance and superiority, these were all walls, but they were created out of fear. And unless we get to the fears of what created those walls, we'll have another recession quite soon. And nobody is examining that question. When you kind of listen to those tapes, but there was people talking in the bank, and how they were talking about other people, and you ask yourself, what's their story? How did they come to talk about other people in that way? They didn't come out of the womb like that. And something has happened. And unless we understand it and see that their arrogance was a protection against failure, then we'll continue to witch hunt them and judge them. And how can we now progress? Unless we understand human behavior, no matter how difficult it is, we cannot progress. And remember, that kind of behavior comes and arises from your unconscious. It is not it's not that a child, right, consciously sits down in the morning and think, I'm going to slash my arms today to get attention, right? Or I'm going to throw a major temper tantrum not to go to school. They don't do it consciously, they do it unconsciously. They're not trying to make life difficult for you, but they are trying to show how difficult life is for them. And is there any mature adult out there who can hold a space for them to bring to consciousness what they had to hide? So, and there's a notion, right, that the future of society lies with adults. Actually, the future of society lies with young people. The reality is the future of society always lies with adults, because children and teenagers have to survive us. They have to bend their lives around us in order to survive us, because they depend on us. Adulthood is about becoming independent. It's about flying the nest and leaving the nest and becoming your own person and occupying your own individuality and being separate and independent. That's adulthood. But how many of us get to that place? Or do we still stay with all those unconscious fears of failure and what other people think, which is the most common fear of all? What do other people think about you? Or fears of rejections, fears of not being accepted, fears of being ugly, fears of being unattractive. Oh my God, multiple fears that we have. So, the future of society lies with you and I as adults. And the more that we come into maturity, the more it is safe for our children to come into maturity. If we're in places of fear, our children need to bend themselves around our fears, because it will be risky to go against them. Fear governs so much of our lives and leads to us unconsciously devising all kinds of defensive strategies to eliminate or at least reduce the physical, emotional, social, intellectual, behavioral, creative and sexual threats we encounter. So, all the threats that we can encounter in our lives. And when we no longer secretly try to win love through relationships, work, status, wealth, success, We become much better artists, business people, politicians, parents, students or teachers. We are free to do what we do as a form of creative play rather than as a form of self-validation. Now you see, if adults don't come to that place of creative play and we do what we do as a form of self-validation, whether to get votes or to get acceptance or recognition or success, then how can we inspire our children to be free, to live their lives as a creative play? Because when you live your lives as a creative play, well, there's no end to what you achieve, but you're not your achievements. And if you fail, you pick yourself up and you learn from it. But you're not devastated by it, or you're not embarrassed by it. The same principle holds true in every sphere, from political leadership to spiritual practice. Given the great challenges facing our planet, there's a tremendous need for wise leaders who can, out of their love for humanity, put the long-term benefit of the planet above the short-term interests of their approval ratings. Now, they can only do that when they come into consciousness. And one of the things we need to look at this evening, how do you actually create safety for consciousness to arise? No parent, no teacher, no politician wants to perpetrate neglect in this world. But when they're in that protective place, in that defensive walled place, you can perpetrate amazing neglect, right? But only because you want to protect yourself. It's like, a teenager that I was working with, a 14-year-old. He started drinking gin when he was age 11. At age 14, he was addicted to recreational drugs. When I said to him, how do you feel when you take the drugs and the gin? He said, I feel great. I said, how do you feel when you don't take them? I feel absolutely miserable. What's the source of your misery? Father was a member of Opus Dei. It was shoulds, have tos, must, ought tos, and physical aggression and violence. His mother didn't champion him or stand up for him. She was extremely passive. He had no safeguards, right? And therefore, the one way he could feel good was through the gin and the recreational drugs. Is he now being difficult, or is he being wise? Do you think I should now just take away his drink from him and his recreational drugs from him and say, grow up, right, and take care of yourself? Because he has been taking care of himself. Because if he didn't have the comfort of the drugs and the alcohol, he probably would have taken his life. He was so miserable. But you see, what we'll do, we'll judge him now, we'll blame him, we'll put a label on him, and we're still not understanding him. So that, the progress for teenagers is really dependent on the progress that adults make. Carl Jung puts it so well. He says, possibly the greatest psychic effect on children is the life parents have not lived. It's a great line, right? Now, when you talk about the life not lived, it is not about whether you travelled out to America or Australia or Tibet or anything like that, or whether you went to university in this course and that course. The life not lived is the life inside of yourself. I mean, do you have a sense, right, of your amazing individuality and uniqueness and sacredness, your once-off happening in this universe? Do you have a sense of your intelligence and your specialness as a human being? Do you have a sense that each child has a different mother and a different father, and each child, responds to the world in a different way? And, parents often say to me, I treat all the children the same. You can't treat all the children the same because they're all different. And each child will interact with you in a different way. And that's genius, how each child manages the difficult situations within the family. And they go the opposite to each other and find opposite ways of reducing hurt. Do you see the creativity and intelligence of that? Because, you see, if you don't occupy your own, aliveness is an inner issue. If you have a sense of your amazing presence, There's a wonderful book called Falling Upwards. It's written by a Franciscan monk, right? And he talks about we've lost a sense of awe. And now when I sit, with any individual, I'm always in awe because I've never sat with another person like you, and I never will again. And when we interact with our children, do we lose that sense of awe when we want to talk about a difficult behavior? Or does the difficult behavior become more important than the person? It's the same with, you need to see the person with a disease, not a disease in the person. You need to see the person with the challenging behavior, but if you see the challenging behavior in the person, you don't see the person. And so we lose the sense of awe. And of course, if the sense of awe is there, it's far less likely there'll be difficult behaviors anyway. It's when the sense of awe is not there, when I don't see you for yourself, now challenging behaviors will develop, because I'm going to have to find some way for you to see me. So, how much do you feel your own aliveness? That's the issue. That wonderful line by John O'Donoghue, to what degree do you inhabit your own individuality? To what degree do you have a sense of your amazing presence? And when you walk into a room, or you sit in this room, or you meet a friend, or do you have a sense you're bringing an amazing presence to another human being? Or do you feel small and insignificant? Or do you worry that I won't be liked or I won't be accepted? And there are all the fears now emerging. One of the things that we need to really come into our consciousness of is that we operate primarily from an unconscious. Science now accepts that about 90% of human behavior is unconscious. And that's why the world gets into so much trouble. Because if you're in consciousness, you will be nurturing of the world, you'll be affirming in the world, you will not, do people out of their money, or you will not bully, or you will not intimidate, and you will not threaten, and you won't be passive and you won't be shy. You'll be very clear and definite. But you see, comparatively few people are in that fully conscious place. Your drive, your psychological likes and dislikes, your motives to achieve goals, and the values by which you achieve those goals are all part of the emotional etchings buried in your inner core. They shape the way you make decisions, exercise judgment, and take action. They affect the people who come into contact with you, subordinates, peers, family. They affect how you see these people. Your inner core determines how clearly you see and perceive, what you select as important, how you think and act, and the quality of your judgments, decisions, and relationships. It affects the way you frame an issue, how you search for information, and from whom, if from anybody, because some people never ask for help or support. And it very often does these things without tweeting them to your conscious mind. Lovely word, tweeting, right? Now, the issue is becoming aware of dealing with your inner core is at the center of leadership effectiveness and development. The more acutely you're aware of it, the better you will be as a leader, as a parent, as a teacher, as a manager, as a politician. But we need for people to have the opportunities to come into consciousness. Hollis puts this quite well. He said, what remains unconscious in the parent, however well-intended the parent is what will be transmitted to the child and remain a continuing obstacle to a fuller life. So, that girl I was telling you that was cutting herself, hated her body, right? Her father is totally into his body. He can't bear to have any bit of extra flesh, right? He's so careful about his diet. And so unconsciously he sees himself through his body, hadn't come into consciousness about it, and transmitted that right onto his daughter without consciousness. If he had realized it, he wouldn't do it. It's very important to see that. But how then can you bring him into realization? I think one of the cases that really brought that home for me was a 15-year-old. His mother came to me at the end of some lecture, and she told me that he was being quite violent with her. And when I saw him, I kind of got talking with him and just got some details and so on. And at some point, which wasn't very wise of me, but I learned from it. At some point I said to him, "What do you think your mother feels when you kick and hit her?" And you know the wonderful teenage shrug, you know? Right. And I then made the second mistake. I repeated the question. Right? I really would like you to consider what I've said. What do you think your mother feels when you kick and hit her? And he said, "I don't give a shit." Right? Now, I have to be honest. I felt like catching him by the collar and beating you know what out of him, right? Can you imagine that I would have that response? That would even come into my mind that this would resolve this young man's aggression. And I remember catching myself. And there's a lovely line by George Bernard Shaw: "You cannot cure any problem by hurting." So I was working with a father during the weekend. He's so cross. He's always cross. I know tone of voice accounts for most human problems. I'll come back to the other story. Tone of voice accounts for most human problems. But you see, people don't even realize their tone of voice. But he's always on to school about his daughter, right? And say, "You're not doing this with my daughter, you're not doing that for my daughter, and you should be doing that." And the teachers are backing off. They don't want to hear him, they don't want to listen to him. Because he's a threat. He's been aggressive. He's blaming them. He's taking no responsibility. Whereas if he had said to them, "Listen, I'm really concerned about my daughter's progress, and I'm wondering how I can work with you and support you in helping my daughter." What a difference. The tone of voice is different, and it's an I message, not a you message, right? But he does it unconsciously. He had no consciousness that he was doing it. And he had no consciousness when he says to his daughter, "You just do what I tell you." He had no consciousness that was a major threat to his daughter's presence. And it was interesting, even after the first session, he got the message quite well, and when he went home, he rang me the following day. He said, "I asked my daughter, I'm wondering, I really need your help on this. I'm wondering, could you help me, please?" And he said he got the best smile from his daughter ever. See, once you see the person and make your request, you will generally get your cooperation, right? But if you make your request and you don't see the person, but sure, that's the most hurtful thing you can do with anybody. And it's the same in workplaces where the bullying and intimidating went on in financial institutions and a lot of the large corporate organizations. But sure, it just creates such a morale where people are frightened and scared, or they become destructive, or they start getting sick. All sorts of things happen. But when you make requests by seeing the person first, there's no reason why they will refuse. And if they do, they'll have a good reason. But there won't be conflict. There'll be creative opportunities. And it's a good question to ask. When you do challenge some behavior or you want to make some requests, do you always make sure that you do it seeing the person and then making the request? But we tend to do the opposite. And we do it unconsciously unless we become conscious. It was interesting, there was a teacher doing one of my courses in Cork, and I was telling him the story, some people in this room know it, but it was about this child came up to me in a restaurant, and 6-year-old, and there was about 30 people in the room. How she picked out the only psychologist, I don't know, right, but she did, right? And she comes up to me and she says, "I hate school." And I said, "Oh, tell me about that." Well, she said, "No, Mr. Murphy, he's very cross. And I said, okay. And he expects us to have manners, but he had no manners himself. Brilliant, right? Now, mother comes in, because they take the kind of orders in this sitting room where other people were around, and she said to her daughter, you can't be talking to customers like that. And I said to the mother, your daughter and I are having a conversation. Please don't butt in. Now, you see, how many of us champion children in that way? Because how was it that this child comes to a complete stranger and had the wisdom to pick out the only psychologist, right? How was that, right? Do you think now I'm going to say, this little girl, go away, I'm here for a meal, right? But how many of us do that? How many of us kind of turn, the bystander phenomenon, where we don't step in when children are at risk, or indeed adults, even a colleague. If a colleague is being bullied, do you think I'm going to stand aside and pass by? I was saying that to school principals, right, that about 300 school principals I was working with there a couple of years ago. And I was saying, when you walk down the corridors of your school and you hear a teacher shouting at children, do you stop and immediately know that teacher is shouting out for help? He's not trying to hurt the children. He's trying to let us know that he needs support and help to try and manage the situation that he's having difficulty managing. He's shouting out for help. Or do you walk by? And if you walk by, then you need help. Because your passivity means now you're struggling to manage the situation. But you see, you'll do it unconsciously. Only when you come to consciousness will you actually then say, oh, how is it that I wouldn't recognize that teacher is shouting out for help? Or how is it I wouldn't recognize that my passivity means somehow I pass myself by. I don't take action for myself around things that are important. Anyway, when I was leaving the restaurant later, the mother said to me, because I know the owner quite well, and she was saying to me, now, she said, Sarah's a bit of a drama queen. Now, what's mother doing?
Zoning her. Zoning her.
Yeah, she's diluting it, isn't she? She's diluting. And I said to mother, right, and I said, when any child says to me they hate school, I take it very seriously. I take it very seriously. And I would want to discover what is going on. And can I just say that I'm going to be gone for a month, but I'm going to come back in a month, and I'm going to check how Sarah's getting on in school. Now what am I doing?
Caring.
I'm caring, and I'm not going to turn a blind eye. Children need us. Remember, it takes the world to raise a child. Not just parents or teachers. It takes the world. Any adult can have a major impact on a child's life. There's a child that I have just... how to put it, I've never met her, but we've had a 3-year relationship, right? Because our aunt comes to me for help. The aunt sees what happened to her, where there was major neglect happening, repeating in the family now, because this child is living with the grandmother. The grandmother enslaved my client, right? The father, who was school principal, sexually abused her. She never married. She never trusted neither man nor woman in this world, right? She sees the whole thing repeating with her little niece, right? She tells the niece that she comes to see me, and the niece said to her, 3 years ago, she was only 7 then, I'd love to talk to that man, right? See, children know, don't they? They pick up. They know when it's safe to talk to somebody. And so what I did, and I send her cards for her birthday, or if I go abroad a lot, I'll bring back a little present and I'll send it to her. She sends me the little cards, right? How are you, Tony? I love you, Tony, and whatever. But it's like a lifeline for her. It's a lifeline. Children need lifelines. It's very important that we don't let parenting just to parents. Every one of us has a responsibility to children. Not for children, but to children. That's a very important distinction. Parents are not responsible for children. They're responsible to children. But their responsibility to children is to help children to be responsible for themselves, age-related. I mean, toddlers, very often we talk about the teen years, right? We talk about the terrible twos and the terrible teens. Isn't that interesting? Because the terrible twos is where I need to get out of my mother's arms, right? I want to explore, right? I want to be the daredevil that I am, right? I'm a risk taker, I'm an adventurer, right? I'm eager to learn, I love to learn. And I do. And that terrible twos time is when the child is struggling to go from infancy to childhood. It's a very important time. And you see, if you have a parent who overprotects, then the child, and parent overprotects out of fear. So that, the child might fall, or the child might trip, or the child might... And I said, but you're overprotecting the child is far more blocking in the child's progress than if the child trips and falls. And children are great when they trip and fall. You see them, they have a little wind, they give themselves a shake, and then they move ahead, right? If there are major dangers around, you watch out for them. But when a child says, I do, just have the T-shirt, just do it. Just do it. And the child becomes, he doesn't lose that adventuresomeness then. He doesn't lose the ability to publicly speak. He doesn't lose the eagerness to learn. You know, when you look at, in secondary schools, and you look at teenagers, what percentage of teenagers go for the average? What percentage? Roughly 80%. How sad that is. And you see, going for the average is ingenious. It's absolutely ingenious to go for the average, because you can't fail. You can't succeed and you can't fail. Because if you succeed, more is asked for you. And if you fail, you're criticised. If you go for the average, you've controlled the world, right? But everybody loses then. You have an average life, an unlived life, and the world doesn't gain from people being average, right? But it's one of the great protections we've developed. So, classrooms need to be a place where we encourage adventure and we embrace failure as opportunity. And we don't confuse knowledge with intelligence. We have over 50 trillion cells working for us. We never lack intelligence, but that confusion of knowledge with intelligence has crippled many people intellectually. They won't take risks because they're afraid of being said they're slow, or they're weak, or they're stupid, or they're average. There's no average human being, right? And the genius is going for the average. How ingenious. So, I said to the mother about Sarah that something may happen, I said, while I'm away. And can I suggest that if it does happen, be sure you talk with the child and discover what is going on. And that if you do need to go down to the teacher, be sure you talk with the teacher. You see, if you talk to somebody, you're advising. If you talk at somebody, you're preaching. If you talk with somebody, you're discovering. And we tend to talk to or at. And we do it out of fear. We're going to see that more, right? Anyway, I went off about my business, and when you say something, by the way, follow through. In a month's time, I was back. And lo and behold, right, because I had met the owner's teenagers' children before, right, but I'd never met Sarah. Going towards the restaurant door, and who pops out the door? Sarah. And so she's popping out and she's skipping out, right? And I said, hi, Sarah. Hi. And I said, how are things? Things are fine. And she goes about her business. No chat, no talk, no psychology talk right today, right? So I go in anyway. And later on, she says to me, oh, we had a situation here a week after you left. And I said, okay, what happened? She said, well, she went back to school on Monday, you were here on the Sunday, there seems to be no difficulties, but the following Monday, she point blank refused to go to school. And my God, when children dig in their heels, they're marvellous, aren't they? They're absolutely marvellous, right? And you can be damn sure they're digging their heels in for some good reason. They're not trying to make life difficult for you. If you think they're making life difficult for you, then you need to look at your own difficulties, because somehow you're not seeing that your difficulties are creations that are needed in order for you to survive. And it's like another child that I was working with who suffered great abandonment, mother suicidal, mother in hospital in psychiatric hospitals and so on. When mother eventually returned, she just clung to the mother. She was only age 4. When she eventually needed to go to school, she didn't want to let go. And, it was a separation anxiety. The child's, not wanting to go to school made total sense. We needed to deepen her security with the mother, that if she goes to school, the mother's not going to disappear when she's out there. But you see, a lot of people wanted to label her then. But her school refusals made total sense. All human behaviour makes sense when you try to uncover what's going on. So when Sarah point blank refused to go to school on Monday, mother remembered what I said and tried to uncover what's going on. So she says, Sarah, tell me what happened. Well, what happened on the Friday? Sarah is a bit of a chatterbox, right? Children love to chat. And when I used to teach primary school, I used to have chat times. So on Friday, she was chatting, another child in the classroom, and the teacher, Mr. Murphy, says, Sarah, don't come to school on Monday. So why would I go to school on Monday? He's told me not to go to school on Monday. Why would I go to school? And I don't want to go in and face that kind of bullying, right? So she's been absolutely wise and creative. She's not been difficult. So, mother now remembers to go down and talk with the teacher. And she does go down and talk with the teacher. And she says to the teacher, listen, my daughter is terrified of coming into your class. And she's terrified of the shouting in the classroom. And I need your help and support around it to make it safe for my child to return to your class. Hear all the iMessages? She didn't go down attacking the teacher. What are you doing to my child? How dare you shout at my child? Because the teacher's not doing it deliberately. But if you go down in a way of stating that the child is terrified, I need your help and support. There's no judgment, there's no blame, there's a bridge of safety, and there's a good chance the teacher will cross the bridge. And he did. And of course, when I met Sarah, 3 weeks later, things were fine. And she was now talking about her favourite teacher. It was interesting about that teacher in my course in Cork. He picked up on the story about Sarah, realised he'd been shouting at children in a primary school as well. And he took up the message, right, and he began to make requests of children in the classroom rather than ordering them crossly. And he said one of the boys came up to him and said, Mr. Sutton, will say, Mr. Sutton, I love being in your class. And see, children let us know. They know when it's safe, and they will then express it, right? When it's not safe, they will go into hiding in some way or other and find some way to reduce the threat. And so, if I shout as a parent or as teacher at children, what is shouting out in me to be seen? What is shouting out in me that I need to uncover? What fear is driving my aggression? Because there's something needs to be uncovered. And maybe it's that, a woman said to me only yesterday, she has 2 children, she's separated. One child is age 13, the other child is age 10. And she said, I don't love my children. I wonder who else would she have said that to? Because if she said that to anybody else, what do you think would have happen? She'd be judged, wouldn't she? She'd be judged. You know that 20% of mothers don't bond with their children, but they're all terrified of saying it in case they'll be judged. And if we don't say what's going on for us, how can we resolve it? And I was saying to her, I'm so touched. I'm really so touched that you've been able to say that to me. Because it takes safety to be able to say something like that. And I said, that when you say you don't love your children, what do you think the deeper issue there is? And of course, I don't love myself. I hate myself, right? Sure, how can I? It is only from the well of love for myself that I can draw on to love my children. But if I hate myself, sure, how can I bond? And that's why all parenting starts with self. All relationship starts with self. All relationship ultimately is about finding your relationship with yourself. Then you're ready for a relationship with another in a true way. I was telling you about the boy with aggression towards the mother, right? And when I said to him, what do you think a mother feels? And he said, I don't give a shit, right? And I caught myself and I said to him, you know, John, I said, my experience is when young people like yourself are aggressive and violent, and older people as well, and I deliberately said that because I guessed something, when they're aggressive and violent, is because they are deeply hurt. Now what happened? He started crying. He opens the door to me, right? He shows me his hurt. And then the story began to emerge. And remember I was saying that he was the bane of teacher's life. He's 15 years of age. I discovered he had done no school homework in all his school years, right? Which is quite amazing, right? And there was only one teacher in secondary school he would do some work for. He wouldn't work for any other teacher, neither in class nor outside of class. The battles with his mother would begin to inquire, have you done your homework? Show me your homework. Get away. Feck off, right? Let me alone. And then if she's telling me your mother is supposed to know, he would then start punching, kicking her. And so, what is he masking? What is he hiding? What's his terror about? That he would be aggressive towards his mother and aggressive towards the teachers, that he doesn't want to work. And what's the work that he's terrified of doing? How has that come about? He came out of the womb eager to learn, excited to learn, and now it's gone. And so the story emerges. His father is a tradesperson, a perfectionist with a short fuse. And the father is his tool shed, and everything is in its place. And if the father has to shave wood or cut wood, he has to put plastic down to collect the shavings because he can't bear the mess. You know the perfectionism, don't you? Which is one of our great creations, right? Because if I get everything perfect, what do I creatively prevent? Criticism. I mean, fear of criticism is rampant, right? And unless I learn and become conscious that what another person says never belongs to me anyway, it belongs to the person that says it. And I was saying to that girl that, what your father said about your body belonged to your father. And I need to help you to return it to him, return to sender. Your body is perfect as it is. You are beautiful as you are, right? But I can understand you need to take on the message your father said, because it would have been highly dangerous for you to continue to go up against his fear of overweight or whatever. It would have meant more criticism and more rejection. And so you now begin to starve yourself to get your body perfect. And how creative you've been. But now we have an opportunity for you to realize that what your father said was never about you, it was about himself. And he needs to look at how did that come about in his life. It's a great realization, by the way. No matter another person says, thinks, or does, it belongs 100% with them. It does not belong to you. No matter what you say, do, and think, and feel, 100% belongs to you. Now we have separateness. But if I think what you say is about me, now I'm in conflict with you. And if I'm dependent on you, I now have to bend myself around your projections onto me. Around your body, or around schooling, or around having to be successful, or be the good boy, or whatever it is. I have to bend myself around you. Because if I don't, I'll get hurt more and more and more. Anyway, this kid, when he was 4 years of age, discovered his father's tool shed. The father had forgot to lock it one day, right? And the kid goes in, and can you imagine the excitement? Things he'd never seen before, right? And there were all these things in cupboards and drawers that he needed to pull out and look and examine, right? And he had a great old day, and when the father opens the door at 6 o'clock in the evening, does he see, oh my God, what an adventure you've had. Let me sit down with you and tell me about your adventure. Because that's what the mature father would do. But you see, this father, his fear is that if I don't have things perfect, I'll be judged and I'll be criticized. So he kicks the child, he beats the child, he puts the child up to bed without any food, he doesn't talk to the child for 3 months. And I call that experience, that child's watershed. He learned something very profound that day. Work is dangerous. exploration is dangerous. Learning is dangerous. Because if I try to explore and to experiment, I lose the most important thing in my life, which is the love of my Father, in a very harsh, violent way. How sad. And when I asked the Father to come in to see me, I said, I really appreciate you coming. And I really appreciate you because, with your support and help, I know we can resolve the boy's violence towards his mother and his aggressive behavior towards teachers. See, I made an assumption. I assumed the mother had told him about the violence. Of course she hadn't. He hit the roof, right? He wanted to leave my office immediately and, go home and beat his son for being violent with his mother. Quite unconsciously. I eventually peeled him down from the roof, right? Calmed him down, right? And began to tell him the story. How do you think that your son has come to this place? And he was prepared to hear the story. And I told him the story, and he began to weep. He said, I didn't realize what I was doing. What a wonderful word, realize, right? Because now you see something with realize. Not masked eyes, but realize, right? And he said, I didn't realize what I was doing. And I said, of course you didn't, because if you did, you wouldn't do it. If we were conscious, we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't hurt anybody if we were conscious. If you're conscious of your own worth and value and sacredness, you would not hurt a fly. And he said, Tony, he said, if I've been hard on my boy, my father was absolutely vicious with me to get everything right. See what I mean by the generation thing? I've often traced the origins of present aggression or passivity or addictions back 5, 6, 7 generations. Not because of genes, but because emotional baggage, unconscious issues go from family to family to family to family. And unless somewhere along that generation line, somebody stops and reflects and do what you're doing tonight. Come and reflect and ask the questions. How is it? How is it that I'm so passive? How is it that I'm so shy? In my own life, how is it that I hated my body so much? How is it that I felt I had to care for everybody in order to get recognition? How is it? Reflection. Coming into consciousness, right? So that we can then begin to see that because we're not seen for ourselves, we have to find substitute ways of being seen. My substitute way of being seen, if I look after everybody, then everybody thinks I'm wonderful. But of course I nearly killed myself looking after everybody. And, if I got rejected by my body, then I'm going to just keep my body away from people. Then I can't get rejected again. How so clever. Or if I'm always top of the class and be top of the class, then that's how I get recognition. Can you imagine what happens when we confuse our worth with little bits of behavior? And you know that a high percentage of men die quite soon after retiring from their work. But how many of us can really, truly, honestly say, it is my person that is the most valuable part of, or is the most valuable thing I need to see in this world. What I do is just an exploration, but it is not how I get seen in this world. Because if it is, I'm in great danger. And I was saying that a high percentage of men die quite soon after retiring from work. And they'll tell me, now obviously before they die, they'll tell me, I have nothing left to live for. Can you imagine? That I have nothing left to live for? I've confused myself with work, and my God, not only have they not any sense of the amazing aliveness within them, but they have no sense of all the things that need to be explored out there. They really came into that creative, protective place, I am my work, because that's how I get seen in this world. And you can imagine the impact that has on children if fathers live for their work, right? And what is it? Well, I'm doing it for you. Actually, no, Dad, you're doing it for yourself. Right? This is your addiction. This is your creation I hope that you come to realization around it. And I work with a lot of young people who have fathers who are addicted to work and who don't want to work. They rebel. They go the opposite way. And that's their creation.